every Russian schoolboy knows. Hello, I am Grandmaster Alexander Yermolinsky from the United States. Today I am opening my new monthly show here on the Internet Chess Club titled Every Russian Schoolboy Knows. Well, first thing, where does that title come from? It's actually an old quote from the great Mikhail Botvinnik, the first Soviet world champion. Botvinnik was known for his scientific approach to the game, maybe overly pedantic and dogmatic at times, but he wasn't known for his sharp wits. As the story goes, that once Botvinnik was looking at the game played by some of his contemporary grandmasters, and he made a comment saying, "Oh, he played that move. It's a wrong move. Every Russian schoolboy knows you have to play that in such positions." Well, it raised, some laughs. But jokes aside, what I'm trying to do here, and I will be continuing doing this for as long as it's needed, is to introduce some of you to the things you may have not known before, and also for others to reinforce their knowledge of certain basic things about the theory of chess. Now, the theory of chess spans all the three stages of the game: the beginning, in the opening, and the middle game, and the end game. While there is solid knowledge of basics, is in no way takes away the creative element from your game. In fact, it reinforces it and makes it possible for your talent to flourish. Well, getting a good position out of the opening is absolutely necessary to get the game going. Choosing a correct plan in the middle game would help you uncover your combinational talent, and knowing basic endgame positions would simply make you a better player, the player that is able to finish the games. There is nothing more frustrating than working hard in the opening and the middle game only to blow your advantage in the end game and not to get the deserved result. Also, studying the end games has positive impact on chess players' way of thinking during the game. It makes it more organized because you start with small number of pieces on the board, and it teaches us to see variations all the way through, not to stop too soon, break things down to parts, and then combine them into a plan. Once we learn to do this with the 2 or 3 pieces besides the kings on the board, we could use same methods to studying more complex positions. Anyway, I don't want to give an impression that it's going to be a strictly endgame series of lectures. It's not. I'm certainly going to touch other stages of the game. But for today, to kick off my Every Russian Schoolboy Knows show, I would like to turn your attention to the endgame from the game between Enrique Meking and Rustam Kasimdzhanov. There's the position on the board. Well, it's not exactly what we're going to be talking about because the white f-pawn is going to be lost on the next move. But the question is black then going to be able to win the game? All right. Let's just say for clarity's sake that white on his move here just simply gives that pawn away and black takes it. What is black's winning plan is going to consist of? Usually, when you exchange up in the endgame, one of the main winning methods would be to trade down your rook for the opponent's bishop and pawn. In this case, however, black will, in that case, would be left with the a-pawn. And the a-pawn is, well, obviously the weakest pawn as far as your winning chances in pawn endgames go. Well, when black rather moves his king over to b4 and switches the rook over to a3, he's still not threatening to take the pawn on a4, because then the white king obviously would just take the c1 square. From that, our next step and our logical conclusions would be to first try to drive the white king away, as far away as possible from the c1 square, and then switch over to that plan with the king on b4 and rook on a3. Now, how to drive the king away? Well, if there is no white bishop, white pawn, and the black pawn, then we know how to do this. We all know how to checkmate long king with the rook. How do we do it? We use Zugzwang. I don't know if many of you ever realize that, but if chess introduces a new rule that you can pass and not to make a move when you don't want to, then you shouldn't lose with king against king and rook. When the opponent puts you in Zugzwang, you just simply lift the king and then put it back down on the same square and say, I pass. There'll be no mate then. Here the situation in a way is a bit similar, because white might just be able to play a move with the bishop when black expects the white king to move. So driving the white king away could be a little difficult. Anyway, so let us see what could have happened in the game if in this position making played his king to e2. Now black then would take the pawn. White goes somewhere king e3 and say I play a few moves of this variety. Now what black is trying to do? Black is trying to line up his king against the white king that way. Then the rook has to swing over down, and then with check. So that way, hopefully the white king will be driven away over to the G file. Well, first problem that we have trying to execute this plan is that our king, if we are black, cannot occupy the d3 square. So that bishop that is sitting there protecting the a4 pawn, and he actually is anchored by the a4 pawn as well, also does some other jobs, namely taking away the d3 square. But black can try to get around this problem. Well, suppose white plays here bishop c6, and the rook goes over, and bishop back, the rook can come to e7. Now, here's how it's done. If white now plays the move bishop c6, then there is check. A check is the key part of the method. Now, where does the king go? If you go up, now, as the bishop is on the vulnerable square, the rook steps back, hits the bishop, winning a tempo. White has no time to move the king away from the opposition to the black king. And after this, black makes the next step. Alright, fair enough. And then say here, and the king comes to g3, and the king g2. Once again, in such situation, black has to make a waiting move. Now, if the bishop once again leaves the protection of the a4 pawn, then comes that check, king to g3, and rook f6. Now, well, come to think of that, if black is successful in establishing this procedure, he may even be able to checkmate white or force the loss of a bishop. I think you can see it coming. Some move like rook g1, and if there, then check. There is no king h4 anymore on account of rook g6. So with that, you would have to go to h6. And now the black king can take the f5 square and come to f6. Actually, here white's position is already hopelessly lost. He's gonna be either mated or he's gonna have to abandon the a4 pawn and simply switch to defenses with the bishop against the rook. But hey, the pawn on a5 is alive. So this is the danger that white is dealing with. In order to defend, and now I have to go back a little bit in the history of this endgame. It obviously happened before and after. The first game that reached this position, I think with colors, maybe colors reversed or the mirror image on the other side of the board with the h-pawns. It was the game between Solvay and Rubinstein. Solvay was a player from Warsaw, and he was older than Rubinstein, and Rubinstein actually came to replace Solvay as the best Polish player of the early 20th century. They played a lot of games, and one of them went into this classical endgame, which Rubinstein, I believe, was able to win. Later analysis, however, proved that Salva missed the best defense. So now, what's the best defense? Well, the best defense consists in keeping the king on the white king in the situation, keeping king where the bishop could help by preventing the opponent's king get in opposition to your king. In other words, the f2 is the correct square here. With doing this, and your bishop needs to be on b5, of course. So I need to step a few moves back, and here instead of so right here in this position, after this move, black needs to play the king to f2. Now, when the rook comes to e3 here, now watch it. It's very important. At this moment, white shouldn't play with the king, because if you play away with the king, then the black king can get around. It can go around the d3 square and come to d2, and set up once again the situation in which white would have to move the bishop, and the bishop then would be exposed to a rook attack, and black would make progress by means of giving the check from f6 and pushing the king further away. So that's where the key moment comes in, and in this position, white has to make a correct move. The correct move here would be staying on the diagonal. And now the black king simply cannot come through the d3 square, and obviously can't leave the e3 rook unattended. Well, next question that I may get from my listeners is, why not move the king over to f4? Well, it's possible, but it would not help black to accomplish his plan, which is basically driving the white king over that way. So for that, obviously the king has to come from the d file. Well, you could try this, you could try that, but the position is drawn as long as white defends it correctly. All right. One more thing I want to mention before we return to the game between Meking and Kasimdzhanov. Just recently, in this year's Vaikanzea tournament, a similar endgame appeared in the game between Alexei Shirov and Alexander Grishuk. I was here in the ICC virtual booth commentating on the games, I believe with Ronan Harzvi, and once that position appeared on the board, there were a lot of questions how this endgame gonna work out, and I briefly, as much as I could, offered some explanation to the endgame. As it turned out, that Grishuk did not choose the most stubborn method of defending, possibly because he felt dejected and had a bad tournament. I was just playing it out to finish the game and knew he was lost, or possibly just maybe he didn't know. But well, that the part comes, I'm talking about. You can be a great player, and yet, with room to improve. I respect I respect a lot of players, whose games I get to see here on the ICC and follow on the chess base and such. Yet once in a while I uncover, the certain gaps, even in their knowledge of typical basic endgame positions. So let me try to fill it in for you. I'm not saying that Grishuk should be listening to this, but maybe even could be useful even for him. All right, so let's go back to what we had in the beginning. Now, in this position, Meking, the man won 2 interzonal tournaments and was really a cult figure in chess back in the 1970s, coming from an exotic, non-traditional chess country of Brazil, and some of eccentric behavior over the board, and most importantly, great chess he played. And unfortunately, he had developed some health issues, and that effectively took him away from professional chess. And I was very happy to see him making a comeback now. He played some tournaments, tried best he could. I'm just glad, that he's back in chess. Rustam Kasimdzhanov, also an interesting figure in history of chess, completing the line of interim world champions: Khalifman, Ponomarev, Kasimdzhanov. Somewhere in between was also Anand, who won that knockout tournament, that since then lost its status of a world championship, and now it's called a World Cup. I think these guys took inordinate amount of criticism for not being worthy champions. All they did, they just won a tournament. You're not supposed to be blamed for whatever shortcomings of the system are, only because you happen to win the event. Anyway, so they play this end game, and at this moment, Meking went king c2. Now, indeed, the king goes where the action is. Unfortunately, it happens to be a serious mistake. Another endgame that went similar direction was a fairly recent game between Vladimir Kramnik and Ruslan Ponomarev. I think that was from the Tal Memorial. Maybe we could dig it out, this game, some other time, but you'll see what's wrong with king c2 real soon. The black king advances to d4. Now, white simply sheds the pawn because it's pretty much useless. Now, he stayed there on b2. In reply to king d2, black, of course, would give this check, and if now white tries to get back to where I suggested the king should be, namely f2, he's not getting that far. And in this particular position, white is in big trouble. Mainly because the king is obviously is not safe here on the first rank, and any unfortunate move with the bishop, say bishop c6, would lose the game immediately to rook c2. Somewhat more stubborn is to do this, but then once again black could use the same method. So he does this, waits for the bishop to go somewhere, and now comes rook d2 check. You cannot come back to e1 on account of rook c2, so you must go to king c1, and then the king goes to d3, and we get into the same position. So it's possible that king d2 move would have been more stubborn, but I think the white's position is already lost. Although I haven't checked it with the ancients. I may be wrong don't argue with Nalimov table basis. But king went to b2. Now Kasimdzhanov is going to play the very much the right way here, putting the rook on c5 and making sure that the white king is confined to this area. Now the pawn on a4 and the black pawn on a5 make it impossible for the white king to come out. So this is the area for the white king now. Now, when the king is that confined in the endgame, and the remaining piece, the bishop, also has a job of protecting the a4 pawn, well, we, or black in this case, immediately begin thinking zugzwang. Well, let's see how it's done. King went to b3. Now black went around to come to d2 square. Now this was all played reasonably. Instead of the move bishop 8, white could have played king b3, but it would hardly change anything on account of rook c3 check. So let's return to bishop e8. Now the rook comes to c4. That's the next step, restricting the white king even more. Now from this position, Black now needs to reposition his pieces. The king and rook should change places. This is how it's going to be done. Okay, now it's in the game. Making already saw the writing on the wall, and he gave up the pawn. It is probably instructive for us to see what would have happened in the case of more stubborn defense. Here is that famous attack on the bishop. Now the bishop comes to b5, the king goes to b4. King b2, rook check. That's the basic position. That's pretty much what Kramnik got with colors reversed against Ponomaryov. Once again, the issue is going to be zugzwang. Well, how? We'll see. First move is rook d8. Now that takes away the squares on d7 and e8, so pretty much the bishop has to go back to b5. Now rook d6. There is your zugzwang. Now if you play here bishop e8, then there is rook e6, followed by the rook coming to e1. Well, what's left is to move the king. Now in reply to that, Black then plays his king to b3. So, same thing now. Mate is threatening, so the only reasonable move, of course, is king c1. And now the rook comes to d8. That's your final zugzwang. If you notice here that the diagonal for the bishop, on which the bishop protects the pawn, turns out to be too short. The squares d7 and e8 are taken, and obviously going to c6 is impossible on account of that pin. Okay, I went through all the series of explanations, and I hope I made the point that in this position, the right idea would be to keep the king on e2 and f2, where the position of the bishop on b5, controlling the square d3. Once again, I will repeat this line, just for you to see how it works. And on the check, not to f4, but to f2. That's your defensive position, and it holds the endgame pretty easily. Well, every Russian schoolboy knows. Well, with that, I would conclude my first lecture here, but we will be returning to this game between Meking and Kasimdzhanov next month, when I will briefly tell you why Meking figured he could part with the a4 pawn and still continue resisting. Thank you for your time you spent with me. This was Grandmaster Alex Yermolinsky with his new monthly show here on the Internet Chess Club. Every Russian schoolboy knows. Take care. Bye-bye. Every Russian schoolboy knows.